Hello, folks. So, BDNF, shocker, and resistance training. Okay, so I did a video a while back. This was a few years ago. I looked for all the information I could find, the research that was out there on resistance training and BDNF. And I came across one study with some issues, in my opinion, and I covered that. So this is an update. I came across a newer and I think better designed study entitled Comparison of High Intensity versus High Volume Resistance Training on the BDNF Response to Exercise. So, the long and short of it, this appeared in the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2016. I will link to it down below, so if you want to go find it. It is a free PDF that you can read to your heart's content, and I encourage you to do so. But I will sum up what's in it. The gist of it, the good news. I know you're all sitting on the edge of your seats. Indeed, BDNF is increased from resistance training. If that is all you want to know, audio. Nice having you here. But further, so the study, like I said, I have an intellectual crush. Well done research here. They seemed to know something about, of all things, weightlifting. Imagine that. Designing a study where you actually know something about that in order to look at BDNF. Huh. Okay, so they split these males into two different groups randomly. Like I said, the one group was high intensity. I would not want to be a part of that group. The other group was high volume. So the high intensity group did 90% of their 1 rep max, 3 to 5 reps for 4 sets of each of the 8 exercises per day. Okay, so they did 4 days of a 4-day split. 3 rest days in a week. And both groups did exactly the same exercises. And they chose classic compound movements that are gonna hit lots of muscle groups, which I was impressed with that. So they did kind of a random day with legs, back, and biceps together. So they did back squats, deadlifts, leg press, lat pull downs, barbell bent over rows, and barbell bicep curls. And then they had a chest try shoulder day. So that was bench, incline bench, dumbbell flies, seated shoulder press, lateral dumbbell raise, and tricep extensions. And then they went back to the first. So they did 4 days. I'm assuming maybe the rest day was in between, but I don't know where the rest day was. What they found, and then so that was the high intensity group was, like I said, 90% of their 1 rep max, 3 to 5 reps. The high volume group did in the 10 to 12 rep range for 70% of their 1 rep max. Some exercises that were left off, guys. Okay, Brett Contreras would not be happy. No hip thrusting. No pull-ups, no chins, no dips. Okay. All right. And no RDLs. You got the deadlifts, but I kind of like remaining deadlifts myself. So what did they find? Well, like I said, both groups dramatically increased their BDNF at the end of an 8-week period. They did measure BDNF. What was different compared to other studies that have looked at serum BDNF, they looked at plasma BDNF. The reason for that was, so plasma is a part of the blood, as is serum. But you can spin it off, and the plasma does not contain platelets. And their reasoning and logic for this was that platelets actually contain a fair amount of BDNF that gets secreted in response to exercise. And so they wanted to look at really changes in plasma BDNF. They were assuming that would be more indicative of an acute response to the training stress and not so much the acute. So, and basically the turnover in plasma is about 6 minutes. So they looked at immediately following exercise, the 30-minute mark following exercise, and then the 60-minute mark following exercise. And like I said, both groups saw a fairly dramatic increase in BDNF. But the group that saw the bigger spike in BDNF was the high volume group. And I mean, they kind of looked at it as one of the things, looking at some of the endurance training in the past that has increased BDNF, is that it's been related to volume, is what they think. They've done high intensity training with endurance, but it's usually high volume as well. So they were thinking that that was one of the bigger pushers of the increase in BDNF. Originally, in the previous video I shot, I was questioning whether BDNF in the blood, in the serum, or just floating in the periphery, correlates with BDNF behind the blood-brain barrier, right? Because brain-derived neurotrophic factor, these things, we have a blood-brain barrier. What I've since learned about BDNF actually suggests that, in fact, looking at it in the blood, whether it be the plasma or the serum, probably is a reliable way to look at it. The reasoning being that I've come to has been, I've learned more about, say, for example, BDNF and pain. So BDNF is correlated with pain. And when you experience pain, part of that is, right, the parts of your nervous system that are most at risk of being compromised would be in the periphery, given your everyday life. So just to give you a really tiny mini course on neurophysiology, or just neuroanatomy, which correlates with neurophysiology. You have what's called the cell body of neurons. All of those are in what's considered the central nervous system, the CNS. The CNS is exclusively the brain and the spinal column. So that stuff is the CNS. The peripheral, the PNS, peripheral nervous system, would be anything outside that. So the way everything works, you have the cell body, where a lot of the big stuff happens in the cell. It's where you make stuff. It's where the nucleus is. It's where you're going to do a lot of your metabolic type stuff that cells do in general. It's going to happen there. And then in the nervous system, like I said, these are some of the largest cells in the body. You have what's called an axon, which is the long finger-like projection that goes out to your toe. Let's say your big toe has a neuron in it. That axon is connected to a cell body that is in the CNS. It's in probably the base of the spinal column. So on a practical level, what ends up happening in your nervous system is you manufacture, you make a lot of the crap that you need. Highly technical term there, guys. Or I would say the majority of it gets made and produced in the cell body, which to the big toe, depending on how tall you are, that's a few feet, right? You don't, in spite of the fact that you send signals up and down neurons really fast because of creating an electrical signal, and basically ions. I don't want to get into that. Getting into the ions moving across borders and stuff like that. Basically, you send a signal, but other stuff like moving shit from the cell body to the big toe, that doesn't happen very often. I mean, very quickly, I should say. And so what you have is this very slow transport called axonal transport. And if you want to compare it to something, it's like back in the olden days when we were, say, loggers were trying to move something, they would have like logs kind of lined up, and they would like put another log, go across the top of them and roll it. But it's not, these little microtubules move things over the course of days, all the way up and down. And so it's not a very efficient way of moving stuff if you need something there quickly. So it makes perfect sense then that the way you get BDNF to a site of injury where, say, a neuron's been compromised and you're going to have to rebuild, you're going to need to rebuild cells and cause repair and cause growth. You need that there quickly to call in all the right players. And the way you're going to do that is going to be with the blood. So it makes sense that that's going to be in some of it's going to be in the platelets, some of it's going to be in the acute phase reactants is my suspicion. Again, some of this I'm just shooting from the hip here, and I haven't read this. I will try to get you better information in the future. But I suspect that's part of what's going on. And so it makes sense then that the method or the route that we're going to get BDNF to that peripheral neuron is going to be through the blood, as opposed to through the nervous system, even though that's behind the blood-brain barrier and very protected. So all that to say, I stand corrected because I think I asked the question thinking, like, why would that correlate with, why would looking at it in the peripheral blood correlate with what's behind the blood-brain barrier? Well, it actually does. And I think in this study, they thought it was somewhere in the neighborhood of, about an 80% correlation to how much was actually manufactured in the brain. I think in the hippocampus in particular. So, interesting, huh? Increased BDNF in both of them. So, the gist, definitely weight train. And you know what? Even if you do the whole high intensity thing and you're going to do 3 to 5 reps, you're still going to increase BDNF. Now, is it the most efficient way to increase BDNF? Not as good as high volume, lower intensity, 70% of that 1 rep max. So, thanks for tuning in. Audio.